Now I'd like to show you how to pull data out of DonorQuest. And to do that, we create a selection. And to start the process, we click this select button in the middle of the toolbar. What this brings up is the creating a selection dialog box. You'll see there's several different types of selections going across the middle of the screen here. The default is range, which is the most basic, and we will cover all of these during this demonstration. There's a couple fields up above here, selection source and source table. I will cover those in just a little bit. And you can see there's a selection name at the top of the screen. And this is actually really critical. You want to name all your selections, describe the selection so you can go back and reference it at a later date. When we finish this selection, you'll see we're taken to another screen which has a spreadsheet of all the selections you've run for all time. And so if you ever want to go back and reference a selection you ran the previous day or the previous month and either refresh it or refine it, you can more easily find them, of course, if you can easily reference what you were looking for. So for this first example, what I want to do is just look for all the donors who live in California. So I'm just going to type in the selection name here. Then down below here where it says field name, I'm going to click on the drop down arrow. I'm going to choose state for the field, and then I'll double click here on lower value. And this brings up the range that we want for this selection. So to find all the donors who live in California, what I want to do is have the lower code CA for California and the upper code CA for California, which is basically telling DonorQuest to look for any donors who have their state field value equal to CA. And then I'm just going to hit begin. And now we're taken to the selection results screen, and this is the screen I was referencing earlier where you can see all the selections you've run in the past. To view the donors who were pulled up in this selection, we click the view button over here to the left. And I can expand this by hovering the cursor at the lower edge of the spreadsheet and then pull down. And we can see that in this sample database there are 16 donors from California, and you can see that their state code is all CA. So I'm going to click OK and go back to the selection screen again. Okay, so now I want to show you the next selection, which is total for range. So this selection type is really useful for finding donors who gave a certain cumulative total during a specified time range. So what DonorQuest actually does is it goes through, and let's say you have a donor who gives 3 $50 gifts in 1 year. It's actually going to find all 3 of those $50 gifts and add them up to 150. So if you were running a selection like the one I'm going to do next, which is all donors who gave over $100 last year. And to be more specific, I'll say last calendar year. So then I'll go down here to the cumulative total and in the from space type in 100. Then I'm going to leave all the 9s here. For the gift date, I'm going to switch that and go back to last calendar year, so 2012. And then down below here, you'll see there's a couple more drop-down arrows. There's field and comparison. I won't go into those right now in detail, but if you were looking for certain types of donations, for example, for a certain payment type like check or cash, or if you're looking for donations from just one stimulus code, you could choose that here. But for now, I'm just looking for any and all gifts that add up to over $100 in 2012 for donors. So I'm just going to hit begin. And it looks like in this little sample database there was only one. So I'm going to look and see who that donor was. And it was Brad Anderson. And let's look at his gifts for 2012. So you can see he did have one gift of $3,000 in 2012. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, if Brad Anderson had three $50 gifts that added up to over $100, so he had $150 in donations, it would have pulled him in this result as well. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the selection screen again. Okay, so the next selection type I want to go over is lists and profiles, so I'm going to choose that. And if you recall when you were doing data entry earlier, there are 10 list code fields under the constituency tab, and there are 5 profile codes under the additional info tab. And these selections are quite simple, and that's because DonorQuest searches across all the fields for whatever code or codes you choose. For example, one donor could have their board member list code on field list code 1. Another donor could have their board member list code under field 10, and DonorQuest would search across all of those 10 list code fields to look for donors who have that code in any of the fields. So let's look at the board members we have in this sample database. So I'm going to click on board member list and click select, then click OK. And now you can see the board member list code is in the include for space. And remember to always name your selection. So I'm going to name it all board members. And the profile code selection works exactly the same. So if you were looking for a specific profile code, you would either choose include or exclude, and then hit begin. And you can see in our little sample database there were 3 board members. So we're going to click on the results and view, and then if we take a look at these donors by clicking the edit button to the left and then go over to constituency, you'll notice that these donors do in fact have the board member list. All right, so now let's go back and click the select button again. And the next selection type I want to show you is general conditions. And this is a great way to grab donors who have multiple fields equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, begins with. You can see there's a whole list here of comparison fields. But for the demonstration today, I'm going to do a pretty simple one. I'm going to find all the donors whose last name begins with B. So for the selection name, I'm just going to type out exactly what I just mentioned. And then here down below where it says field name, I'm just going to highlight the last name and then move on to comparison. And we're looking for begins with. And then for the value, I'm just going to type in B and then begin. And if we click view now here, we'll see here are the 5 donors in our sample database whose last name begins with B. Okay, so now going back to select again. The next selection I want to cover is duplicate check. This is a selection that will go through and pick out donors that could be potential duplicates. So we recommend you run this once a month, and that will help you keep ahead of any duplicates that get added to the database. DonorQuest does have some built-in checks to look for duplicates, but occasionally they do always slip through. what I recommend you do to begin with is just click the Use Defaults button, and I will walk through this now. So what's DonorQuest is looking for here is donors with the same last name, 10 characters across, the same first 4 characters of their address, and the first 10 letters for the city field. And you can always add fields if you want to look for example, donors who live in the same state, last name, address, city, or another useful one is to look for organizations that have the first 10 letters the same. For example, to look for duplicate organizations or companies. But once you have all the fields here that you want to start with, you just hit begin, and DonorQuest will go through and flag any potential duplicates. It won't merge any of them for you. You'll still have to go through manually and look and make sure they are in fact duplicates, but then there is an option to merge them at that point. Okay, the next type of selection I want to show you is predefine. What predefined selections are selections that we have created for our users over the years. A lot of them are multi-step, multi-criteria selections that are rather difficult for beginning users of DonorQuest to do right off the bat. So what we've done is just actually built them right into the program, and all you have to do is highlight the one you're interested in and then just hit the begin button, and DonorQuest will automatically enter all the criteria for you and then take you to the selection results screen so you can view the donors that meet the criteria. And all the descriptions here do a pretty good job of telling you exactly what data is being pulled. But of course, if you have any questions, give us a call and we can better describe exactly what the criteria are. Let's look at this one, donors who have 2 or more donations exceeding $100 each. So I'm just going to highlight that, hit begin, and it'll take us to the selection results screen, and let's take a look at these donors and their gifts. And if we click the window tile all vertically, we'll have it kind of maximize across the screen here. And if we scroll through the donors, you'll see that the donations down below actually will switch to reflect the donor's name who's highlighted above. So if we look at James Burke, he definitely has 2 or more donations exceeding $100 each, and all the donors captured within the selection do meet the criteria. Okay, so let's go back to the select screen again, and the last tab over here is user defined. So if there are selections that either you define yourself or you call us using customer support that we help you create, any custom selections that either you create or we create specifically for you will be stored here. Okay, so next I want to go over some of these other fields on this creating a selection window. So the first one I want to cover is selection source, and if you click on the drop down arrow here, you see 3 different choices: donor, archive, and buffer. So all your donors by default are stored in the donor data set, which is the default for all your selections. So 99% of the time you're going to be working within the donor data set. It's your main place where you store all your donors. Let me describe archive and buffer. So archive is where you would store lapsed donors, for example. So if you have DonorQuest, say 5+ years, and your mailing list continues to grow, at a certain point you may want to start to archive donors who have lapsed, who have not given, for example, in 5 years. And the reason you would do that is you don't want to delete them completely. You may want to try to reactivate them in the future, but temporarily you want to store them somewhere other than your main data set because you want to eliminate them from most of your mailings. You want to eliminate them from most of your campaigns, for example. So what you can do is copy donors from your donor data set to your archive data set, and then they will be removed from where you do most of your work. But you can always go back and reference them if you choose to do so. The buffer data set is where we recommend you import donors to. So for example, if you purchase a mailing list and you want to import that mailing list into DonorQuest, a good place to import it to begin with is the buffer data set. A couple reasons for that. In the buffer data set, you can kind of look at the data to make sure it's actually accurate, that all the fields have lined up. For example, once it looks good, you could then import it into your main donor data set if you choose to do so. Another reason is, if you just wanted to kind of keep this new mailing list separate from your already established donors, you can kind of keep it there for a while, and as donors give or become active from that mailing list, you can then add them to the main donor list one by one. Okay, so now moving over here to source table, if you click on the drop down arrow, you'll see header, donations, pledges, memos, extra addresses, linkages, contacts, and all of those correspond to these data entry windows and icons that we covered earlier in the demonstration. What the source table is really important for is reporting, and that's what we're going to cover next. So this will be explained in more detail in the next section, but I'll cover it really quickly right now. So the source table header relates to name, address information. So if you remember when we were entering the donor's name, address, their list codes, all that information that was on that main information view, that is header information. Donations are the gifts that we entered earlier, and pledges are the pledges, and so on and so forth. But when you're looking for specific information that you want to pull into a report, it's important to consider that before you begin your selection. So if at the end of the day you want mailing labels, name, address information, you should leave the source table header. If you're looking for a donation detail report, looking for specific donations within a certain time range, and you're really interested in monetary totals, you should choose the source table donations. And again, if you're looking for specific pledge information, forecasting reports, looking at how many pledges are outstanding this year, how much you're expecting to bring in through pledges, you want to choose the pledges source table, and so on and so forth. So again, we'll cover this more next when we get to reports. Okay, so now moving down here to the lower portion of the screen, you'll see there's several checkboxes. So all ranges must be true. We talked about that earlier when we were doing the general condition search. You can also use it for the range search, for example. If you have multiple criteria or multiple fields that you're searching across, if you want all of the fields to be true, meaning that if you're looking for a value, you want all of the values to be true, you would leave this checkbox checked. If any of the values could be true to pull that donor into the selection, you would leave it unchecked. Consider soft credits. So when we were talking about donations earlier in the demonstration, there was a soft credit field. If you want to look at soft credits, you'll check this box. And then we went over this earlier in the demonstration as well. Exclude inactive, bad address, do not solicit. So if you recall, if you have donors who are inactive or check bad address or do not solicit, you can exclude them from mailings. So if this is going to be selection that you're going to be using for a mailing, you want to make sure those are checked. So that wraps up selections, and next we're going to move on to reporting.